Hi guys, this is Kamilla Schaffner and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're talking about a very popular topic, gluten-free diet. Ultimately, gluten is a very healthy component of a generally healthy diet. Gluten is a protein found in complex carbohydrate foods, mostly grains. It's usually found in abundance in wheat, spelt, kamut, rye, barley, oats to some extent, especially if there's cross-contamination in factory production, and products that contain wheat. It can be surprisingly so many things, from ice creams to salad dressings to baked goods and confectionery. Gluten is very predominant in modern nutrition. Once you eliminate gluten for a long amount of time and say you want to reintroduce it to your diet, the fact that you have not had gluten in your digestive system kind of shuts down to a certain extent enzymatic production responsible for digesting of gluten. Reintroducing gluten after a long period of having gluten-free diet can be somewhat difficult for the digestive system to handle. That's when people can experience a lot of digestive discomfort. It's when they had a really long period of time going gluten-free, and then all of a sudden they decide to treat themselves to a big bowl of spaghetti bolognese, and of course there are a whole plethora of symptoms of, distension and bloating and potential gas, and that can be a result of prolonged withdrawal of gluten from the system. It is only difficult to be gluten-free if you're heavily relying on packaged foods. If you are eating very simple, wholesome food, then it's not that difficult. The way I consult my patients is to understand where during the day you're mostly reliant on gluten-containing foods. Is it at breakfast time? Is it at lunchtime? Is it at dinner time? Or is it more snacks that sort of support your nutrition throughout the day? Where does gluten sit in terms of your daily nutrition? And once you know the points that you need to take care of, it becomes extremely easy to substitute certain foods for others. So once you identify which meal in particular you're relying on wheat or gluten the most, then it becomes very easy to structure your nutrition throughout the day where you will be able to replace your gluten-containing foods without any problems. So for example, if that's the breakfast, if you are a breakfast person and you typically consume 2-3 toasts that are high in gluten, or you go for cereal that also contains gluten, then you need to just swap your gluten toast with maybe non-gluten-free bread, or roast potatoes, or hash browns, or polenta cake, or even baked beans. If your main point of gluten consumption is typically lunch or dinner time, where you typically rely on pasta or pizza, then again, it's very easy to substitute. Just think about wholesome, complex carbohydrates that are also grains, but grains that do not contain any gluten in them. The easiest thing to always remember is rice, corn, quinoa. They do not contain any gluten, and it's always a good idea to substitute your gluten-containing things like couscous or barley or rye with these particular grains. They're high in protein, they're very high in fiber, and they're always readily available. The only one time that I foresee clients struggling is when they rely on prepackaged snacks that are high in gluten. You have to be very, very careful when you replace your man-made packaged snacks, and you have to read labels very carefully. So obviously it has to say it's wheat-free and gluten-free. And just try to remember one thing. A lot of the time, wheat crops and wheat as a commercial production is fortified with minerals and vitamins. Gluten-free products may not necessarily be fortified in the same way that wheat products are. So this is something for you to consider when you're going gluten-free. Whether you're celiac, or whether you're just, you have a small gluten sensitivity, or you just have a small intolerance to gluten, you have to make sure that your gluten-free substitutes are fortified appropriately. And if they're not fortified appropriately, if you don't see clearly stated, okay, it's fortified with vitamin B, vitamin D, vitamin E, then you might potentially want to consider supplementation. So you need to be very mindful that once you go gluten-free, you have to also make sure that you check with your clinical nutritionist or your GP your vitamin and mineral status post your diagnosis. You need to make sure that you're not making this deficiency worse, and you're just blood test away from identifying whether you're zinc deficient or you're deficient in iron. That will prevent a lot of other secondary conditions settling in. Also, another thing to remember, just be very mindful of things that naturally contain gluten, and we never think about these things. And I am always inclined to mention alcohol first because people never think about alcohol and gluten, but beverages like beer, vodka, whiskey, they contain gluten for the most part. So I know a lot of alcohol producers now producing gluten-free substitutes to similar products. The way gluten seeps and worms into food production is incredible. You know, you can find it in toothpaste, you can find it as a filler of supplements, you can find it in ice cream, you can find it in soups, you can find it in dry seasoning, you can find it in obviously plethora of baked products, confectionery, spreads. So be always very, very careful. Read your ingredients list. Ask questions, email food producers, but you need to understand, because a lot of the time food producers are allowed by law to call gluten hydrolyzed vegetable protein. That doesn't mean anything to anybody, but it can be very, very dangerous for somebody who is celiac. I hope you guys now know that it's not very difficult to substitute gluten-containing foods with non-gluten containing foods. And my biggest advice is always keep it simple. Keep it simple and you won't make a mistake. If you're wanting to substitute gluten, if you want to stay away from pasta and pizza, then go for wholesome, simple foods. Potatoes, beans, lentils, chickpeas, corn, quinoa. These are fantastic foods that are healthy, they're high in protein, they're high in fiber, they're high in minerals, they're high in nutrients. You can't go wrong substituting typical wheat-containing products for these very simple, wholesome foods. With special thanks to Jackson & Rye, one of my most favorite restaurants in Richmond. Always beautiful and very healthy food to enjoy.